Welcome to Griffonomics.
Glad to be here.
So, how did a government antitrust lawsuit just accidentally hand one company a perpetual multi-billion-dollar monopoly on America's favorite beer?
Yeah, that is the multi-billion-dollar question we are tackling today.
Right, because, you usually think of corporate dominance as something engineered in a boardroom over decades. We just sort of assume there's a master plan.
Exactly. But sometimes a company is just standing in the right place with the right checkbook when the federal government decides to drop the hammer on a competitor.
And that is exactly what happened here. So today we are taking a massive stack of source materials, earnings reports, strategic presentations, Wall Street analyses, to really generate a granular strategic report and investment roadmap focusing on Constellation Brands.
Ticker symbol STZ.
Right. STZ.
And we are looking at a company undergoing just a fundamental tectonic identity shift right now. Our mission for this deep dive for you listening is to explore Constellation's transition from a quote-unquote builder of massive capital-intensive brewery capacity into an operator churning out high-margin free cash flow.
Which is a huge pivot.
It's massive, and to get there, we really have to unpack the exclusive Grupo Modelo import rights. We have to dissect the complex socio-political headwinds currently facing their core Hispanic demographic.
Yeah, the demographic data is wild.
It really is. And critically, we need to map out the drastic capital expenditure reduction roadmap that they're projecting through fiscal year 2028.
So the stakes here, they are fascinating for anyone managing a portfolio right now. Constellation is sitting at this rare corporate inflection point.
Yeah.
They're managing severe macroeconomic stress tests, sticky inflation, shifting demographics, global health trends that are just rewriting consumer habits, while simultaneously preparing for a cash flow windfall so massive that it recently caught the attention of Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway.
And, when Berkshire Hathaway enters the chat, the market pays attention.
Oh, absolutely.
They initiated a stake and then aggressively more than doubled it. So we have this fascinating tension, right? A company navigating immediate, tangible headwinds, but holding a structural financial trump card that they are just now beginning to play.
Okay, so let's wind the clock back, because we really can't understand the financial architecture of Constellation Brands today without understanding the legal earthquake of 2013.
Right, the foundational moat.
Exactly. The beer engine.
Yeah.
So take us back to that moment, because looking at the documents, it feels like the ultimate antitrust accident.
It really was. So the landscape of global beer in 2012 was entirely defined by massive consolidation.
Right.
Anheuser-Busch InBev, the undisputed global heavyweight, the maker of Budweiser, Bud Light, Stella Artois, they wanted to tighten their grip.
Which makes sense for them.
Yeah, so they announced a $20 billion plan to acquire Grupo Modelo, which is the Mexican brewing giant behind Corona, Modelo Especial, and Pacifico.
So AB InBev basically looked at the shelf and decided they needed to own the entire premium import segment on top of their domestic dominance.
Pretty much. They wanted it all.
I remember reading about that proposed merger. It felt like an unstoppable corporate juggernaut at the time.
It did, but the U.S. Department of Justice looked at the math and panicked.
Why did they panic?
Well, the DOJ filed an antitrust lawsuit to block the merger, and their logic was grounded entirely in pricing power.
Okay.
If AB InBev, which was already the dominant domestic player, acquired Grupo Modelo, the third largest player in the U.S. market, the concentration would become dangerous.
Right, like an actual monopoly.
Exactly. The DOJ's economic model suggested this consolidation would make it incredibly easy for the remaining large brewers to just tacitly coordinate price hikes.
Because there wouldn't be enough competition to keep prices in check.
Right. They were terrified of stifling competition in an industry that was already notoriously top-heavy.
So the government essentially stepped in and told AB InBev, they couldn't have the U.S. market. But they didn't block the global acquisition completely, did they?
No, they didn't. They forced a massive concession. AB InBev could proceed with acquiring Grupo Modelo globally, but they had to completely and permanently divest Modelo's entire U.S. business.
Wow.
Yeah. They were legally barred from importing and selling those Mexican brands inside the United States.
Enter Constellation Brands.
Enter Constellation.
At the time, if I'm reading these historical financials correctly, Constellation was primarily a wine and spirits company.
They were, yeah.
They had a joint venture with Grupo Modelo called Crown Imports, but they didn't actually own the underlying asset.
Right, but they saw the opening of a lifetime. So in June 2013, Constellation Brands paid $4.75 billion to acquire the exclusive perpetual U.S. rights to import and market the Grupo Modelo portfolio.
Just a total steal in hindsight.
Oh, unbelievable. They bought out the remaining 50% stake in that Crown Imports joint venture for about $1.85 billion, and they spent $2.9 billion for Modelo's state-of-the-art brewery in Nava, Mexico.
The transformation in their revenue mix since that day is just staggering. I mean, when Constellation bought those rights in 2013, beer was roughly half of their sales. Fast forward to the fiscal year 2026 data in front of us, and beer accounts for over 90% of their total revenue. Can you break down the scale of that dominance today?
Yeah, we are talking about $8.32 billion in net sales in FY26 just from the beer segment.
Just from beer?
Just from beer. Constellation now imports 93% of all Mexican beer that enters the United States.
That is basically a monopoly on an entire country's export to us.
Exactly. And Modelo Especial didn't just grow, it structurally reorganized the U.S. beer market. It dethroned Bud Light to become the #1 selling beer brand in the entire country by dollar sales.
And I always hear analysts talk about their efficiency. The sources highlight that Constellation pushes this incredible volume through a remarkably tight portfolio. I think that the number was around 160 SKUs.
Yeah, roughly 160 stock-keeping units.
Right.
And that's a critical component of their operating margin. Compare those 160 SKUs to competitors who are managing these sprawling portfolios of over 1,000 SKUs.
Which is a nightmare to manage.
Exactly. Every additional SKU introduces supply chain complexity, marketing fragmentation, and shelf space battles. Constellation runs this lean, hyper-focused portfolio through what they call their gold network of exclusive regional wholesale distributors.
Okay, so how does that gold network actually drive the bottom line? I understand having exclusive distributors, but why does a low SKU count make them so much more effective?
Well, think about the incentive structure. The sales representatives at these wholesale distributors are compensated largely on commission per case sold.
Right, they want to move boxes.
Exactly. They are naturally incentivized to push the most recognizable, fastest-moving products. When Constellation hands them a highly demanded brand like Modelo, backed by massive national marketing, that product moves off the truck rapidly.
So the distributor makes money faster.
Yes. The distributor becomes highly profitable, which makes them incredibly loyal to Constellation. They prioritize shelf placement and end cap displays for Modelo because it just guarantees their own commission checks.
So they have this perpetual legal license, a hyper-efficient distribution network, and an incredibly lean product lineup. But I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
Look at the origin story. Anheuser-Busch was legally barred by the federal government from keeping this asset. Constellation just happened to be the joint venture partner standing there with the cash.
Right.
Isn't this massive success fundamentally just a byproduct of incredible legal luck? Like stumbling into a winning lottery ticket because the guy in front of you wasn't legally allowed to buy it.
I hear that argument a lot. And, the 2013 DOJ settlement was an undeniable stroke of fortune, but attributing their current market cap to luck completely dismisses the decade of brutal, flawless operational execution that followed.
How so?
Because you don't scale a brand to the #1 spot in America purely on a legal technicality. Constellation still had to build the physical infrastructure to support that demand.
Right. They had to actually make the beer.
Exactly. Consider the Nava brewery they acquired in that 2013 deal. It sits right on the Mexico-Texas border. It spans 885 acres.
Yeah, for context for you listening, that is roughly 3 times the size of Tesla's massive Fremont manufacturing plant.
It is an absolute industrial leviathan. It produces nearly 30 million hectoliters of beer annually. And Constellation didn't just inherit it and coast, they poured billions into engineering it.
What kind of engineering?
Well, they partnered with Siemens to outfit the entire facility with bleeding-edge automation, robotics, and process controls. It is deeply vertically integrated.
Meaning they do everything there.
Exactly. They control the barley malt processing, the glass bottle manufacturing, the metal can fabrication, all on site or nearby.
Wow.
Yeah, they took a great legal asset and engineered a physical machine that produces high-end beer at a fraction of the unit cost of their competitors. That is operational mastery, not luck.
Okay, fair enough. So they've built this incredibly efficient automated beer engine. But an engine is useless without passengers to drive it, without consumers to buy the product.
Very true.
Let's look at the actual people driving this demand, because the financial reports paint a very stressful picture right now. We need to do a forensic analysis on their market dynamics and their core demographics.
Yeah, and this is where things get complicated, because the core vulnerability of Constellation's model lies in its heavy concentration.
Right.
Roughly 50% of Modelo Especial's total volume is driven by one specific cohort, the Hispanic demographic.
And the brand equity there is enormous. I mean, it's an authentic connection rooted in Mexican heritage, and historically, this demographic has demonstrated the strongest brand loyalty to Constellation's products across the entire industry.
Absolutely.
But the macroeconomic data suggest this specific consumer base is being squeezed mercilessly right now.
They really are. The source material we have is quite explicit about the distress paralyzing this consumer base. Economically, lower-income households and Hispanic consumers are bearing the brunt of cumulative inflation.
Yeah, just the day-to-day costs.
Essential living costs, housing, food, transportation, they've eroded their discretionary income. But the reports go deeper than just inflation. They highlight a severe socio-political anxiety that is fundamentally altering consumer behavior.
I was reading the Wall Street analyses on this, and they specifically cite a palpable, quote-unquote, fear of IC raids, immigration and customs enforcement, and broader immigration concerns.
Yeah.
And just to be clear to you listening, we aren't taking a political stance here. We are just impartially reporting on the content provided in these reports, analyzing this purely through the lens of consumer behavior and corporate revenue.
Right. Our job is just to look at the data.
Exactly. And the data shows this anxiety is causing a massive chilling effect on commercial activity.
It is. Because when individuals feel simultaneously economically stretched and socially vulnerable, their behavior contracts. The reports detail that these consumers are actively avoiding restaurants and bars.
They're just staying in.
They are staying home. They are sharply reducing their participation in large social gatherings. And in the beverage alcohol industry, consumption is intimately tied to occasions.
Right, like barbecues, watching live sports, family celebrations.
Exactly. When the occasions disappear, the volume disappears with them. This dynamic is severely depressing buy rates in Constellation's historical strongholds, particularly in California and Texas.
But here is the metric that absolutely fascinated me, though. You would naturally assume that dropping volume means the consumer is abandoning the brand for cheaper alternatives.
That's the usual pattern, yeah.
But management's internal data shows that despite buying less physical volume, the Hispanic consumer's actual brand loyalty scores for Modelo and Corona have actually increased during this period of distress.
And that is a critical nuance. It's the distinction between wallet share and mind share.
Okay, unpack that.
Well, it suggests the volume decline isn't a rejection of the brand. It's a reflection of sheer financial and social constraint. They aren't trading down to a cheaper domestic beer because they prefer it. They simply can't afford to buy as much Modelo, or they lack the social occasion to consume it.
So I picture the relationship like a high-tension rubber band.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Thanks. It's like the bond between the Hispanic consumer and Modelo is being stretched to its absolute limit by inflation and political stress. It's incredibly tight. But the attachment itself hasn't snapped.
Right.
So the thesis is that when that macroeconomic tension eventually releases, the loyalty remains intact, ready to snap back into purchasing behavior.
That visualization captures the management's confidence perfectly. But while they wait for that tension to release, they cannot afford to stand still. They have to find growth elsewhere.
And surprisingly, they're finding it in a demographic that is terrifying the rest of the alcohol industry. Generation Z.
Yeah, the Gen Z recruitment is the ultimate silver lining here.
Because the broader narrative is that younger consumers are embracing a sober, curious lifestyle and abandoning beer entirely. Yet the data here shows Constellation's portfolio indexes at twice the industry average among 21 to 25-year-olds.
Twice the average.
So how are they defying gravity with Gen Z?
The tip of the spear for this demographic is Pacifico. Analysts are affectionately referring to it as Baby Modelo.
Baby Modelo. That's hilarious.
It's fitting, though. The Q4 metrics are staggering. Pacifico saw massive depletion growth, which, tracks the speed at which the product is actually sold to the end consumer, up approximately 21%.
21%.
Yeah, and another heritage brand, Victoria, was up about 17%. Generating double-digit growth in a macro beer category that is otherwise stagnant or declining is phenomenal.
So what's the cultural hook for Pacifico? Why is a 22-year-old reaching for that over a domestic craft IPA or, a hard seltzer?
It's a combination of perceived authenticity and highly targeted marketing. Pacifico has this relaxed surf culture heritage that feels less commercialized than the massive flagship brands.
Right, it feels a bit more underground.
Exactly. Constellation is leveraging that authenticity, but they are also aggressively pushing the brand far beyond its traditional geographic borders.
Right, they aren't just relying on California and Texas anymore. The strategic roadmap shows them pushing massive marketing dollars into the East Coast and the Midwest.
Yep.
And I found it really fascinating that they're specifically targeting SEC college football territories. They are dropping significant capital to integrate Pacifico and Modelo into tailgating culture in the South.
It's a textbook expansion strategy. They are utilizing highly localized, data-driven marketing, balancing massive live sports advertising, including major pushes around the upcoming FIFA World Cup with hyper-targeted digital campaigns.
So they are actively building new geographical and demographic strongholds to offset the pressure on their core base.
Exactly.
So you have this really complex dynamic. Your most loyal customers are financially strapped and staying home, but their brand loyalty is higher than ever. Meanwhile, you're successfully recruiting a new, younger demographic.
Right.
How does a company practically manage this on the retail shelf? I mean, if your most loyal customers are completely strapped for cash, how do you keep them buying your product?
You implement a strategy known as price pack architecture. It is a masterclass in packaging agility.
Yeah, the psychology behind this is brilliant. Imagine a consumer walks into a convenience store with only $5 in discretionary cash. A standard six-pack of Modelo might cost $9 or $10. If you only offer this six-pack, you lose that customer entirely to a lower-tier, cheaper beer. Constellation's solution is simple. Don't lose the customer, change the packaging.
Exactly. They engineered budget flexibility directly into their product lineup. They introduced 7-ounce bottles for Modelo and Corona.
Which are tiny.
They are, and they rolled out 8-ounce cans. Crucially, they introduced large format 32-ounce bottles that retail at an incredibly accessible price point, roughly $4.49 to $4.99.
So it allows that financially constrained consumer to still participate in the premium brand experience without breaking their budget.
Yes.
It's a retention mechanism masquerading as an innovation.
That's exactly what it is. It protects the brand equity because the consumer doesn't feel forced to downgrade to a sub-premium tier. They still get their Modelo, they just buy it in a format that hits their immediate cash flow.
But clever packaging sizes can't solve the much larger existential threat looming over the entire food and beverage sector. We need to confront the GLP-1 paradox and what analysts are calling the Great Sobriety Shift.
Oh man, this is undoubtedly the most disruptive macro trend we are analyzing today.
It's massive.
The underlying cultural shift is already well underway. The U.S. drinking rate has fallen to 54%, which is a near 90-year low.
Wow.
Furthermore, public perception is shifting dramatically. For the first time, a majority of Americans, about 53%, believe that even moderate drinking is detrimental to their health.
So the cultural zeitgeist is pivoting hard toward wellness and mindful consumption.
It is.
And then you introduce a pharmacological catalyst, GLP-1 weight loss drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy. The source materials detail how these medications don't merely suppress the appetite for food, they fundamentally alter the brain's dopamine reward pathways.
That's the scary part for the industry.
Yeah, they mute cravings across the board, and that includes the neurological desire for alcohol.
The physiological mechanics are devastating for the alcohol industry because beyond the neurological dopamine suppression, scientists hypothesize that GLP-1s significantly delay gastric emptying.
Which means food and drink stay in the stomach longer.
Exactly. This slows the absorption of alcohol in the stomach, which dulls the rewarding euphoric buzz of a drink, while simultaneously amplifying negative gastrointestinal side effects like nausea and bloating.
So you don't get the buzz, but you get sick.
Right. And the data crossing Wall Street desks is alarming. A comprehensive Morgan Stanley analysis projects that widespread GLP-1 adoption could trigger a staggering 75% reduction in alcohol consumption among patients actively using the medication.
Wait, a 75% reduction.
Hmm.
How does Morgan Stanley arrive at a number that catastrophic?
They break it down into two compounding factors. They estimate patients will engage in 50% fewer drinking occasions overall. And when they do decide to drink, they will consume 50% fewer beverages per occasion.
Oh, wow. It is a compound fracture for alcohol demand.
It really is. Analysts extrapolate that if just 10% of the U.S. overweight and obese population adopts a GLP-1 regimen, total U.S. alcohol demand could decline by 6%.
And if adoption became universal?
If it became universal across that demographic, total industry volumes could plummet by 55%. It is, by definition, an existential threat.
So I read through Constellation Brands' management transcript looking for their defense strategy. Because when Wall Street tells you your customer base might cut their drinking by 75%, you expect a five-alarm fire drill.
Naturally.
Instead, management's response is essentially nothing to see here.
Yeah, it is a remarkably confident, arguably hubristic defense. Management categorizes the GLP-1 impact as negligible and largely transitory.
Based on what?
They base this on three core arguments. First, they point to adherence rates, claiming patients typically only tolerate or afford GLP-1 drugs for 3 to 6 months before abandoning the treatment.
Okay, so they think people just quit the drug.
Right. Second, their internal telemetry suggests that once a consumer ceases the medication, their alcohol consumption reverts almost identically to their prior baseline.
But it's their third argument that really made me pause. They claim that even while a patient is actively taking the drug, beer is somehow insulated from the effects.
Yeah, that's a bold claim.
They concede the drugs impact high ABV wine and spirits, but they equate the drug's impact on beer consumption to its impact on water consumption.
Right. They are essentially arguing that people drink beer for hydration and refreshment, not for a dopamine hit, making it immune to the drug's neurological suppression.
I have to push back heavily on management's narrative here. Comparing a beer to a glass of water when discussing a drug that literally rewires the brain's reward center feels intellectually dishonest.
That's definitely a stretch.
Is this a Blockbuster ignoring Netflix scenario? Are they just whistling past the graveyard by minimizing a fundamental rewiring of human brain chemistry as a passing fad?
Well, if you analyze their operational actions rather than their public statements, you see a company aggressively hedging its bets.
Meaning they're taking it more seriously than they let on?
Absolutely. Publicly, they must project confidence to protect the core narrative of their beer engine. But privately, they are rapidly deploying capital into what they term their betterment portfolio.
Ah, watch what they do, not what they say. Let's look at the actual product pipeline. To hedge against this sobriety trend, Constellation is rapidly innovating. They recently launched Corona Non-Alcoholic.
Yep.
They just debuted Modelo Chelada Limón y Sal Non-Alcoholic. And most tellingly, they fully acquired a company called HOPWTR.
The HOPWTR acquisition is the smoking gun that reveals their true strategy regarding the sobriety shift.
Because HOPWTR isn't a beer.
No, it's not. It is a premium, calorie-free sparkling water infused with hops, adaptogens like ashwagandha, and nootropics. It is chemically engineered to offer functional benefits, stress relief, relaxation, cognitive clarity without a single drop of alcohol.
So Constellation is telling Wall Street they aren't worried about declining alcohol consumption while simultaneously buying up the exact products designed for consumers who are quitting alcohol.
They are playing both sides. They are building a moat within their moat.
Exactly. If the consumer stops drinking Modelo, Constellation still wants to capture that exact same relaxation occasion with a can of HOPWTR.
That's the goal.
But while the beer engine seems capable of weathering this storm through agility and hedging, the company's other major segment is taking on massive amounts of water. It is in free fall.
The Wine Spirits Sputter.
Right. Let's pivot and look at the market skepticism surrounding that, forcing a massive strategic pivot.
It's crucial to remember that historically, Constellation Brands was a wine and spirits behemoth that happened to buy a Mexican beer business.
Which is funny to think about now.
It is, because today, the legacy wine and spirits segment is an anchor dragging down the enterprise. The fiscal 2026 fourth quarter numbers are grim.
Let's hear them.
Net sales for the segment plunged 58%. Shipment volumes plummeted an astonishing 72.9%. And most alarmingly, segment operating margins completely collapsed to a meager 1.3%.
Wait, a 1.3% operating margin? For a business built on luxury perception and agricultural assets, that is effectively zero profitability.
It's barely breathing.
And management's full-year fiscal 2027 guidance offers little immediate hope, projecting a continued depressed margin of just 5% to 6%. What is the structural failure causing this collapse?
It is a confluence of severe macro headwinds, international trade friction, and a massive self-inflicted strategic restructuring. First, you have the category-wide global decline in wine consumption we just discussed.
Right, the macro trend.
Second, you have a devastating international trade barrier. The reports detail a strict ban on U.S.-made or U.S.-sourced wine and spirits in Canada.
Let's unpack that, because a trade ban doesn't just happen overnight. Why is Canada banning their wine, and what is the actual financial impact?
The Canadian market is incredibly vital. It represents Constellation's largest international export market for wine.
Okay.
The ban stems from complex retaliatory trade disputes involving agricultural sourcing and labeling standards. When you abruptly lose access to your largest foreign buyer, the revenue doesn't just dip, it vanishes.
It's just gone.
Millions of dollars in projected sales evaporate, leaving the company holding stranded inventory. Which leads us to the third major headwind, distributor destocking.
Destocking. We see that term constantly in consumer packaged goods right now. Explain the mechanics of that specific to the wine industry.
So during the pandemic, when off-premise alcohol consumption spiked, wholesale distributors aggressively overordered to ensure they didn't run out of stock. They filled their warehouses with cases of wine.
Sure, because everyone was drinking at home.
Exactly.
Huh.
But as the pandemic boom faded and consumer demand normalized, and then further contracted due to inflation and health trends, those distributors realized they were sitting on massive, slow-moving inventories.
So the distributor basically calls Constellation and says, don't send us another shipment for 6 months. We have to sell through the backlog sitting in our warehouse.
Precisely. Constellation refers to it as mutually agreed inventory destocking. It is a necessary reset for the supply chain, but in the short term, it absolutely decimates Constellation's top-line shipment volumes, hence that 72.9% drop.
Wow. If the house is on fire, how do you stop the bleeding?
Well, management executed a massive strategic pivot. They call it the 2025 wine divestitures.
Right, they pruned the tree.
Constellation looked at their sprawling portfolio and made the ruthless decision to sell off their low-end, mainstream, high-volume wine brands. We are talking about widely recognized supermarket staples like Woodbridge, Cook's, Meiomi, and Simi.
And they sold them en masse to the wine group.
It was an aggressive, necessary amputation. The data clearly showed that mainstream wine bottles priced under $15 was facing terminal decline, with sales dropping around 7% annually.
People just don't want cheap wine as much.
Conversely, premium wine was showing much more resilience, down only 1%. Constellation realized the bottom of the market was falling out permanently.
Right.
By divesting those brands, they didn't just lose revenue, they shed underperforming agricultural assets, aging production facilities, and massive supply chain overhead. This restructuring is designed to yield over $200 million in net annualized cost savings by fiscal 2028.
It completely shifts the new center of gravity for the entire division. The surviving portfolio is vastly smaller, but highly concentrated. Over 90% of the retained wine and spirits portfolio is now focused exclusively on premium labels priced at $15 or more.
They kept the absolute crown jewels.
Right. They retained Kim Crawford, which dominates as the #1 selling Sauvignon Blanc in the U.S. and the top New Zealand import. They kept The Prisoner, which commands massive pricing power as the #1 super luxury red blend.
And they held on to high-end craft spirits like High West Whiskey and Casa Noble Tequila.
The strategy makes logical sense. You cut the massive volume of cheap wine to save the high-margin premium core. It's like pruning a diseased branch off a tree to save the trunk.
Right, but there's a catch.
Exactly. I want you listening to consider the financial reality here. They sacrificed 58% of their top-line revenue, literally selling off their volume, to chase a higher operating margin that is currently sitting at a disastrous 1.3%. Is the math on this premiumization pivot actually going to work out?
It is the classic corporate dilemma of volume versus value. Management's conviction is that consumer-led premiumization is the only viable long-term survival strategy in wine.
Because people are drinking less.
The thesis is simple. People are drinking less wine, but when they choose to drink, they demand a superior experience and are willing to pay a premium for it. The unit economics of a $25 bottle of The Prisoner are exponentially better than an $8 bottle of Woodbridge.
So the margins on premium glass, high-yield grapes, and brand marketing scale much more efficiently.
Right. Constellation believes that by concentrating exclusively on this high-growth, high-margin segment, they can eventually return the entire wine and spirits business to a highly profitable 22% to 24% operating margin by fiscal 2028.
So it is severe short-term trauma for long-term structural viability.
Yes.
But, trimming the fat in wine and spirits is really just a warm-up act.
Yeah.
The true financial masterstroke of Constellation Brands, what's happening over in Mexico with their capital expenditures, is the main event.
This brings us to the strategic inflection point.
Exactly. This is the primary reason Warren Buffett's team aggressively accumulated the stock. We need to bridge the gap between their financial realities today and the massive cash flow engine they're building for tomorrow.
Let's establish the baseline first by reviewing their full fiscal year 2026 performance. Enterprise net sales came in at $9.14 billion.
Right.
On the surface, that looks like a 10% reported decline year over year. But as we just detailed, a massive chunk of that was the intentional divestiture of the mainstream wine volume.
So when you adjust for that restructuring, the organic enterprise decline was a much more modest 4%.
Precisely. And crucially, that massive beer engine showed genuine sequential momentum as the year closed. In Q4, beer net sales actually ticked up over 1%, and depletions, the actual consumer takeaways, grew 0.6%.
But the engine is stabilizing. But the real story, the thesis that Wall Street is buying, is the CapEx to free cash flow bridge.
The transition from a, quote, builder to an operator.
Right. Let's break down exactly what that means in dollars and cents.
It signifies the conclusion of a relentless, decade-long spending spree. For the past 10 years, Constellation has been trapped in a highly capital-intensive expansion phase.
Because they had to build the physical capacity to just support the explosive growth of Modelo.
Exactly. In just the last 5 years alone, they have poured over $5 billion into expanding their Mexican brewing operations.
Just astronomical sums of money.
We discussed the massive 885-acre Nava facility, and they are currently finalizing construction on another massive state-of-the-art brewery in Veracruz.
Building factories at that scale requires staggering amounts of cash. Capital expenditures, or CapEx, peaked at roughly 13% of their total net sales in fiscal year 2025.
Which is incredibly high for this sector.
Right. When you compare that capital intensity ratio to mature competitors like Molson Coors or AB InBev, who typically spend around 5% to 6% of sales on CapEx, you realize how much of Constellation's cash was just being buried in concrete and steel.
But here's the inflection point that changes the entire valuation of the company. As that massive Veracruz brewery finally nears completion, the era of heavy infrastructure building concludes.
Thank goodness.
Management projects that by fiscal 2028, their CapEx requirements will absolutely plummet from that 13% peak down to a normalized 4% to 5% of net sales.
So they're officially transitioning from building the factories to simply operating them.
Yes.
The financial mechanism here is beautiful. It's exactly like paying off a massive commercial mortgage on an apartment building.
I love that analogy.
Well, think about it. For 10 years, every extra dollar of cash flow you generated went straight to the bank to pay for the construction. You were asset rich, but cash poor.
Right.
But eventually the building is finished. The mortgage is paid off. The tenants are locked in, paying premium rent every month for Modelo and Corona. And now you don't have a mortgage payment.
The cash flow spigot's open wide and you just collect the rent.
Exactly. It's a great way to visualize free cash flow.
And when CapEx drops from 13% to 4%, billions of dollars that used to be earmarked for construction suddenly drop straight to the bottom line.
Right.
Management is projecting this operational shift will generate roughly $9 billion in operating cash flow and a staggering $6 billion in free cash flow by fiscal 2028.
A $6 billion war chest.
Yeah.
So the immediate question for any investor is, what exactly does Constellation plan to do with all that liberated capital?
They are handing it directly back to the shareholders.
Music to their ears.
Absolutely. In fiscal 2026, they have already returned over $1.6 billion via dividends and share buybacks. They spent $924 million aggressively repurchasing their own shares on the open market.
And they are accelerating the pace, right?
They are. The board of directors just authorized a massive new $4 billion share repurchase program that extends through fiscal 2028.
Let's explain the mechanics of that $4 billion buyback, because it is crucial to the stock's value.
Go for it.
When Constellation uses its free cash flow to buy its own shares on the open market and retire them, they are permanently reducing the total number of outstanding shares, the float.
Right.
If the overall value of the company stays the same, but there are fewer shares in existence, every remaining share you hold suddenly represents a larger percentage of ownership and a larger claim on future earnings.
It mathematically forces the earnings per share higher.
Exactly. They are aggressively shrinking the supply of their stock. Furthermore, they raise their quarterly dividend to $1.03 per share, committing to a target payout ratio of around 30% of their earnings.
They are actively paying you a yield to hold the stock while simultaneously shrinking the outstanding share count to drive capital appreciation.
And this brings the entire narrative full circle to the Buffett catalyst. When you look at this specific moment in Constellation's corporate life cycle, you see exactly why Berkshire Hathaway built a massive position in 2024 and 2025.
It aligns perfectly with the historic Warren Buffett investment blueprint.
Let's run through it.
Okay, it satisfies nearly every metric Buffett notoriously searches for in a consumer monopoly. Does it possess dominant consumer mindshare? Yes, Modelo is the undisputed #1 beer by dollar sales.
Yeah.
Does it have an unbreachable economic moat?
Yeah.
Yes, the 2013 DOJ antitrust settlement legally guarantees their perpetual exclusive U.S. import rights, locking out competitors.
Yeah.
Is it transitioning to low capital intensity? Yes, the heavy building phase is over, and CapEx is plummeting to 4%.
Right.
And finally, does management exhibit aggressive capital return to shareholders? Yes, the $4 billion buyback and rising dividend prove they are prioritizing investor returns over reckless acquisitions.
Is transforming into a highly durable, highly predictable, cash-generative machine.
Exactly.
So we've mapped out the severe socio-political headwinds, the demographic shifts, the GLP-1 threats, and the massive financial tailwinds.
With the cash flow spigots about to open, we look to the horizon. It is time to render the final verdict on the company's trajectory. What does the 2028 horizon look like for Constellation Brands? From a pure strategic and analytical outlook, the consensus rating is high conviction quality.
High conviction quality.
Yes. Constellation is entering what you might call a Goldilocks phase of corporate finance. The heavy lifting of capital intensity is firmly in the rearview mirror, and the cash distributions to shareholders are rapidly rising.
And they are also getting some immediate, tangible relief on the cost side, which helps.
Like the tariffs.
Exactly. The U.S. government recently removed the Section 232 aluminum tariffs effective April 2026. For a company that imports massive volumes of canned beer, those tariffs were brutal.
I can imagine.
Yeah, they created a massive $90 million headwind for Constellation in FY26. With those tariffs officially removed, Constellation gets an immediate structural $90 million margin boost heading into FY27.
That's a massive win. And beyond commodity relief, there is the strategic finalization of their modular capacity strategy.
Right, with the Veracruz brewery coming online.
Yes. Incoming CEO Nicholas Fink, who is taking the helm from retiring CEO Bill Newlands, inherits a fortress balance sheet. The modular approach means the facility is designed so Constellation can carefully activate new production lines to perfectly match real-time consumer demand.
Rather than flooding the market with excess supply and crushing their own pricing power.
Exactly. But Fink cannot afford to be complacent.
Because of the competitors. We mentioned earlier that Modelo Special holds the crown for the #1 beer by dollar sales. But the volume battle is incredibly fierce.
They're very fierce.
AB InBev's Michelob Ultra, capitalizing heavily on the health, wellness, and low-calorie trends, recently surpassed Modelo in total sales volume. The competitive landscape remains absolutely cutthroat, and Constellation is fiercely defending its crown.
It is the ultimate corporate stress test. Can an impregnable financial structure built on a legal monopoly and massive operational scale withstand profound generational cultural shifts away from alcohol?
That is the exact tension I want you listening to weigh as an observer or an investor. You are looking at a company facing a severely squeezed core Hispanic demographic, battling a global structural shift toward sobriety, accelerated by GLP-1 weight loss drugs, and nursing a collapsed wine and spirits division.
Which sounds terrifying.
It does. But on the other side of the ledger, they hold an unbreachable legal monopoly on America's favorite import and a locked-in mathematical certainty of $6 billion in incoming free cash flow.
The ultimate trump card.
So I want to leave you with a final provocative thought that builds on everything we've discussed today. Let's play this narrative out to its absolute logical extreme. Let's assume Constellation successfully executes the plan. CapEx drops to 4% by 2028. The mortgage is paid off, and they're sitting on a massive mountain of $6 billion in free cash flow.
Okay.
But let's also assume the most aggressive bear case comes true. The sober curious movement isn't a fad. GLP-1 adoption skyrockets. Alcohol consumption genuinely and permanently plummets across the United States.
A daunting existential scenario for any beverage alcohol company.
Absolutely. But what if Constellation Brands uses that massive $6 billion war chest to execute a fundamental reverse pivot?
For reverse pivot.
Think about it. We saw them acquire HOPWTR. Could they use the massive free cash flow generated by Mexican beer to aggressively buy their way into entirely new, non-alcohol consumer packaged goods categories?
Wow.
Could they fundamentally evolve beyond the Mexican beer imports that built their empire? Could they buy a sparkling water empire? Could they pivot massive capital into functional energy drinks, sports hydration, or nootropic beverages?
Oh, absolutely they could.
Could the historic 2013 antitrust accident that built their beer empire ultimately serve as nothing more than the funding mechanism for Constellation to fundamentally evolve into a completely different kind of health and wellness beverage giant by the end of the decade?
I mean, they possess the organizational scale, the distribution network, and most importantly, the capital to execute that exact evolution. The operator of the future might look entirely unrecognizable from the builder of the past.
Something for you to ponder as you watch the market digest this transition over the next few years. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Risk defined, portfolio protected.